our first cybersecurity roundtable discussion. Before we kick it off, let me introduce our panel of experts. First up, Grant Gibson, Executive Vice President of CyberReady. Cyber stands for Cyber Institute of Battle Readiness. Grant served in the U.S. Marines as the communications chief. He was also appointed to the Training and Certifications Subcommittee of the National Institute of Standards and Technologies Initiative on Cybersecurity Education, where he provides a voice of leadership to emerging cyber technology education standards in the United States. Next up, Scott Garfield, Executive Vice President of Cyber Warriors. Scott is a 25-year veteran of the staffing industry and has held several senior leadership roles throughout his career. He is a subject matter expert in hiring trends, attracting and retaining talent, and building successful company cultures. Next up, James Stanger, Chief Technology Evangelist for CompTIA. James is a security consultant, presenter, certification program designer, and curriculum designer who has worked with information technology subject matter experts, hiring managers, CIOs, CISOs worldwide for over 20 years. And I'm your host, Russ Munisteri, Assistant Director of Education. I have a 10-year career as a systems administrator and about the same amount of time in education. I presently hold well-known cybersecurity certifications such as CISSP, CAS Plus, Security Plus, and CEH. Okay, let's talk cybersecurity. But before we get to questions, just a few stats. Tech News World came out with an article regarding the cost of cyber incidents. According to the data analyzed by researchers at Atlantis VPN, did you know the cost of cybercrime of businesses, government agencies, and consumers in general was more than $1 trillion in 2020? Just a few stats here. $945 billion was lost to cyber incidents. $145 billion was spent on cybersecurity. Those costs increased by more than 50% compared to 2018, when over $600 billion was spent just to handle cybercrime. 20% of organizations worldwide have no plans on how to protect against cyber events. This is a major problem. James, you're up. Ready? First question, how do you effectively involve management in a cybersecurity program?
You know, I think it really kind of starts with the idea of governance, compliance, and really approaching things from a risk perspective. Rather than talking about the technology, et cetera, you talk about the culture, you set things from a policy perspective, and you let everybody know that it basically begins with understanding, kind of how risk works and what it means to set up a culture that respects so many different things, including security. You kind of have to start that way, and then a lot of the technology will fall in line.
Exactly. Thank you. Grant, question for you. So we have learned about supply chain attacks, which involve third-party vendors. Is there a way to mitigate the threat of cyber risks from vendors and or third-party entities?
Right. Well, if you look back at the attacks of the last 12 months, you see a common thread. The most major attacks that we've seen have involved passwords, and generally they've involved passwords that where a worker, an employee, use the same password at work or a similar password at work to the one they use on social media. So if they get hacked on social media, they get hacked at work. So some of it's the fundamentals, right? Are we practicing what we preach? Are we enforcing good password standards and things like that? Just doing basic fundamental things takes us a long way. But when you look at the supply chain specifically, you're talking about third parties, you're talking about vendors, you're talking about cooperation between organizations. Do we cooperate in cybersecurity? How much should we cooperate in cybersecurity? Do we get audits? Do we do risk analysis? Do we do things like that? And we need to make sure we're doing those things, but we need to share that with the people we're working with, right? If I'm purchasing something from you, I should be able to see what your risk posture is, right? And what mitigation you've done. And I should have an understanding of how we're going to communicate and what are the risks in our communication so we can make good business decisions and find ways to work together safely.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Next question. This is for the entire panel. So, should companies have a cybersecurity incident response plan? Yes or no? If yes, what does this look like, and why is it important now and into the future? Let's start with Scott.
Well, so should they have an incident response plan? Absolutely. What it specifically does that look like? I'm going to defer to either Grant or James because I think they're more equipped to answer that. But certainly, from a should they have it, I think there's no question they should have it.
So, in my estimation, a company that does any volume of work is eventually going to have an incident response plan, either because they've taken the time in preparation to create one, or because they get hacked and now they have to create one on the fly, right? Because sooner or later, everybody's going to get hacked if they're of any size and value. So yes, you're going to have one. You are going to have one. The question is, when do you do it? And what are the effects of when you do it, right? The earlier you do it, the more time you put into it, the more you revisit it, the less you're going to suffer when something does happen.
Just a few weeks ago, I had a managed service provider call me up, a person who had just moved over into a role of security, and they had just been hit by some ransomware. And he was calling me and asking me for tips about, how do we respond best to this incident and talk to our partners about it. I bring that story up simply because there's so many organizations that don't have a plan. Couple of things about incident response. Usually we talk about incident response as a response to some sort of attack. You discovered an ATP, or you discover, there's ransomware, something acute. But I think there's also the idea of systematic or systemic incident response, meaning, well, we've had an issue here with low security. For example, only passwords. We have to move to two-factor authentication or something. So I think there's also the idea of long-term incident response in handling things. Another final thought about incident response is you got to have a plan, and then it has to be part of muscle memory. Too often there's some sort of incident response plan that's kind of part of, locked away somewhere, or people know about it theoretically, but they've never really worked through it. It has to be really inculcated or included as part of the company culture.
Exactly. See, when it comes to cybersecurity, and I think this is something that the Grant may have mentioned before in regards to senior leadership, but we have to get senior leadership to have complete buy-in. Because if they don't have buy-in, then the IT department is ultimately going to suffer. And then when an incident does occur, and it is going to occur, then they are more reactive compared to a proactive, correct?
No question. One of the things that you see is that idea of kind of a strategic IT approach, and that way, rather than seeing IT as a cost center, it becomes more of an opportunity center. That's one way to look at it.
True. All right, thank you. All right, next question. Scott, you're up. So how involved should company employees be in a cybersecurity program?
Well, I think they should be very involved. And I think, to Grant and James's point, it all starts with leadership, right? In setting the direction, building the culture of the importance of security. And, there are obviously different levels of security, and the average person within an organization isn't really exposed to anything other than things like passwords and, strange emails coming in where they're clicking things that they shouldn't be clicking. So, I think if you build a culture around, hey, this is important, all the way up to the CEO, it's something we talk a lot about. It's something that we've invested in. We've got strategy and process built. It isn't a byproduct, right? And somebody mentioned muscle memory. It's the exact same thing with employees. And so I think a periodic meeting, the cadence of that can be figured out, case by case. But I think it's important to remind people about certain things and not take for granted that people know how to do things, because people are at different levels of knowledge when it comes to information technology. So I think it's incredibly important to reiterate certain things and always to kind of inspect what you expect, right? From a corporate standpoint, because at the end of the day, it's the corporation that's going to feel the brunt of a mistake, not necessarily the employee, right? So the onus really does fall back on the corporation to make sure that they've got everything in place.
Excellent. Now, Scott, from your perspective, when it comes to hiring IT talent, now we hear in the news all the time, there are so many positions open, hundreds of thousands of IT positions here and there. What challenges are hiring managers having today in regards to filling these positions?
Well, Russ, do you have 5 hours?
Maybe.
Seriously, there's just a lot of challenges right now with hiring specifically cybersecurity people, but really anybody in information technology. And I think it all starts with basic supply and demand. There's an incredible amount of demand for these folks, and the supply just doesn't honestly equal up to the demand right now. So how do we fix that, right? We've got to get more people going to school for information technology and cybersecurity. We have to get more people getting certified in those skill sets, right? So certification is very important. Education is very important, but then also experience is very important. And there is a tremendous skills gap between what people have and what employers are looking for. So we're doing a lot of work with companies like Grant's organization and MyComputerCareer and some other partners to really kind of help bridge that skills gap that exists right now. I think the other challenge and the other kind of recommendation for companies is look at how you're developing your people internally and professionally, right? I think a lot of companies don't have tremendously built out strategies for how they develop people in IT to move from one position to the next.
This is for everybody. Do you think the challenges of hiring IT talent, is this the new norm? Or do you think once COVID starts to become a little bit more lax, do you think that maybe we'll go back to the old ways? What do you guys think? Grant?
I think we're always going to be behind the curve. Unless we make some great technological leaps over the next couple of years that just make cybersecurity a non-issue, which I personally don't see. Anyways, if you think about it, we are in the business of creating opportunities for hackers, right? We work on things, we work on new products, we work on new technologies, we want to get them to the market, and people want those technologies and they want those services and they want all these things. So we're in a rush to get to the consumer or the business or whoever it is and say, here is this, it's going to make your life better, it's going to make your job easier, it's going to do all these things. And we create these opportunities. We don't spend 10% of the time creating solutions to the security holes that they open up, right? And as long as we continue on that path, it's just going to be the challenge, right? And the question of viability in the long run for us is going to be which companies are taking the time to say, hey, let's figure out this security. Let's protect our customers' information. Let's protect our information. Let's protect our workflow from the bad guys. And the companies that do that are going to be more successful in the long run. But the reality is we're not going to change our model, right? We're here to provide solutions. That's what everybody does every day when they go to work, when they wake up. Even if they're in their home and their family, they're providing solutions for their families. That's what we do. But we don't provide solutions to the security challenges at the same pace. And that's just the way it's going to be for a while.
Agreed. James, is this the new norm? What do you think?
Yeah, I think we've been in that norm for even before COVID. I think there's so many factors that have kind of led to the various skills gaps and things like that. There's so many gaps involved. I think we have labored as an industry under outdated educational models, for example. I think that has led to a lot of myths about, well, if you're a security person or go into security, you have to have so many umpteen zillion years of college before you even think about going into security. For example, there's so many myths out there having to do with what it means to be in an IT job, what it means to upskill and things like that. So there's some nice revolutionary approaches to what education means and what upskilling means. I also think when it comes to the security side of things, too long, I think we've used a lot of outdated metaphors inside and outside threat kind of thoughts. And I think some of the changes having to do with increased monitoring, what people are calling zero trust and things like that, can help change the game, can help improve things incrementally at least. We're going to have problems with us for a while, but as long as security is seen as something that is not included in a business process, you're always going to run into these problems because it will become this, well, it's too expensive to get a security person to review what we're planning to do. Because now you're thinking in terms of add-ons rather than including these people from the beginning.
Excellent. Scott, is this the new norm?
Yeah, no, I agree with James, Russ, that I've been in this business now for 25 years, and I can tell you in the last 20 years, there has always been a very high demand for talented information technology people, especially in things like security that are getting more and more prevalent every single day. There's the demand has outweighed the supply for many years. It's just getting worse now. It is a real problem. It is a real threat, quite frankly, to many, many, many organizations and really our national security. I mean, this is something that we have got to take seriously as a country. We've got to take seriously as an organization of any size. Nobody's immune to somebody coming in, taking their data, taking their intellectual property. It's a real concern, and we've got to have the people. It all starts with people. Every company starts with people and ends with people. So we've got to have the right people. We've got to have the right talent pools that we can go out to. And equally as important, we've got to have the right talent pools that we're developing internally. And, again, I think these are just areas that companies really need to get serious about. How are they going to develop that next level talent within their organization? It's not scalable to go outside and find people every time. So many times we hear, hey, I'm in a networking job and I want to be in security, and even within my own company, they don't have a plan to get me out there, right? Shame on them, because that person more than likely is going to get a phone call and they're going to walk down the street and go to work for somebody else who's going to take a chance on them. So it really put that out to everybody listening to this presentation. Take a look at your own organization and make sure that you've got those mechanisms in place to move people from point A to point B.
Exactly. I'm a firm believer of a professional development, training, and always investing in the employees, because that's how you keep them, and you're also investing in your corporation as well, correct?
No, I completely agree. I think if it all comes down to personality and attitude, and you've got somebody that's eager, who wants to learn, who's got the right attitude, you can teach the skills, right? You can't teach that soft skill. So if you've got that person who's eager, who wants to do more, make sure you're investing in them. And then look to companies like us when it's time to go outside to supplement those folks, because that's important as well.
Exactly. Anytime that I ever go through like a hiring process, or if I'm hiring somebody, I always look for work ethics over skills, because just like you said, you can always teach the skills, but it's hard to teach those work ethics, right? Okay. All right. Excellent. All right, James, let's talk about something a little bit different here. So most people at this point have heard of two-factor password authentication. Now it seems, just as folks get used to this concept, facial recognition and biometric login authentication is on the rise, correct? Are passwords going to be a thing of the past?
Oh, I don't think they'll be a thing of the past for quite some time, but the single password will become increasingly rare because whether it be logging into the cloud as a systems administrator or as a worker, getting that additional text on the phone or whatever, or providing that additional factor, like you mentioned, is becoming increasingly de rigueur. But no, I don't know if, there's movements I've seen, people going to passwordless kind of approaches, things like that. But I think you'll just see a slow fade out of them, and to where other factors will come in.
Grant, when it comes to investing in cybersecurity, as far as companies, what do you think the number one thing that companies should invest in regards to cybersecurity?
That's a tough question. The number one thing, if you go to a stock market advisor and you say, hey, what's the number one thing I should invest in? They're going to tell you, well, you shouldn't have a number one thing you invest in. You should diversify. The same is true in cybersecurity. You should diversify. You need good technology. You need good people. You need good programs. You need good partners. And you need, as Scott thoroughly mentioned earlier, you need to develop. You need professional development in there to keep up, because cyber's changing, right? What they knew yesterday is not going to be what they need to know next year, right? So that's my answer is you need to have a plan. You need to have a budget. And it needs to be diversified properly across all aspects of cybersecurity, right? Because one solution won't get you anywhere except a headache. And you need to make sure that that's spread out in the appropriate places.
Exactly. Okay, excellent. I have one last question, and this is for the entire panel. How can parents help protect their children from bad actors online? Let's start with James.
I think one of the first things, if you're talking about people, teaching their kids about what technology can do, because technology is a wonderful thing. We all know that. I think the thing is, when you're talking about protecting the young, I think, allowing kids to jump in and having their smartphone at too early an age, or to get into use social media, things like that. I think that's disastrous, frankly. I think you need to be very careful about the exposure, not to technology, but to the consumption of technology and the form factors that are available in the hand, and that kids get themselves in trouble with so quickly. I think that's one of the first things. I think this, in other words, don't introduce these things to them too early. I think the first thing, though, is when it comes to technology and kids, teach them how things work at a fundamental level. Don't just teach them to be really elegant consumers. That seems to be the message, the last 20 years. Think about ways that you can show them how technology works. Then you can have a much more informed child, a much more informed adolescent, a much more informed adult who really knows how things work and is far less likely to get themselves in trouble. Some other things I would look at.
Absolutely. Scott?
I agree with James completely. I think I mentioned something before as well, and that is, to inspect what you expect. And I think that's important for parents, right? Anybody, I'm certainly not giving parenting advice to anybody, but, one of the things we always did with our kids was we talked to them about the good and the bad. We never sheltered them from, there are bad characters out there wanting to do bad things. And by the way, this is how it usually happens. So be aware of these types of things, and then, kind of make sure that they understand what those things look like. And then we inspected what they were doing, and we stayed close to them and talked to them about, their usage time and how much time they were spending, and making sure that they had a well-balanced array of things to do. And, we never used those tools as babysitters or anything like that. It was it was just one of the other things that they were involved with, along with all the other things that normal kids do. So, I think any good parent is going to pay attention to what their children are doing and who they're doing it with and where they're doing it. And I certainly think technology falls right into that category. So that's kind of how we did things, and I would recommend that to anybody.
Absolutely. Grant?
Yeah, James and Scott bring up good points, and my thoughts aren't far away from, the first thing I would say is to them is exactly what I'm going to say to you right now. Sit down and take a listen to this, because we need to talk about it. There are some dangerous people out there, right? And we don't know who they are, and we don't know where they are, and we don't know when you'll come into contact with them. But the chances that they do are real, and how we're prepared to deal with that is the important thing here, that we prepare somehow to deal with it. So sit them down and talk about that. Technology is pervasive in our lives. You turn a corner and there is technology staring you in the face. It's not going to go away. You can mitigate it. You can come up with controls to help you deal with the amount of technology your children receive, but they're going to see it somewhere, some way, somehow, and they're going to be inundated with opportunities in that, right? To talk to different people and to meet different things and do different things. And we just need to prepare them for it. You know, there are tools that can help you. There are online tools. There are all these things out there. None of them are foolproof. You know, you got to take a good look and understand the resource and take some time to understand technology that you're using, not just the kids, but you got to understand it too, and pay attention to it. But at the end of the day, we've got to prepare our kids to interact in that world, because it's not going to go away for them. And the best way to do that is to have open communication and talk about trust. We teach people to trust people. We teach people to trust people. Where and how far that trust goes is a conversation we need to have and make sure they understand.
That's a great point, Grant. Just a couple add-ons to what you're saying. It's perfect. Incident response, right? We talked about incident response earlier. You know, teach the kids, right, no matter how young, no matter how old, what it means to respond meaningfully to an incident. And also there is that certain element of, every kid gets into some form of mischief. It's really sad to see sometimes how misuse of technology turns what would be normally, some questionable mischief into something criminal, into something, it amplifies things, so it can anyway. So but incident response, sorry, I just couldn't help but think of that, Grant, the idea, and Scott, what it means to actually, here, this is going to happen. What is your response going to be?
Great point.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, this has been an excellent and informative conversation. Grant, Scott, and James, thank you very much for spending time with us and offering your extensive cyber knowledge. As always, with cybersecurity, be aware, be safe, and be cyber smart.